August 7, 1945. The tropical heat of Guam hung heavy in the air as 23-year-old Miyako Tanaka stepped through the doorway of what the Americans called a beauty salon. Her thin frame, still bearing the hollowed cheeks of malnutrition from months at sea and years of wartime deprivation, tensed as the cool air conditioning washed over her skin. The sensation alone was foreign enough. Refrigerated air in the middle of summer, but what awaited her inside defied 17 years of imperial education and every warning about American barbarism she'd been taught since childhood. "Impossible," she whispered in Japanese, her hand instinctively reaching for the arm of another woman behind her. "This cannot be real." Before her stood a row of padded chairs with strange mechanical devices suspended above them. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting not the torture chamber she had been conditioned to expect, but something entirely different. American women in crisp uniforms smiled at her. The air carried the sweet chemical scent of perfume and hair products, luxuries unseen in Japan for years. Bottles of colored liquids lined glass shelves, and soft music played from a radio in the corner. "Please sit," said a female American officer through a Japanese-American interpreter. Her voice lacked the harshness Miyako had been told to expect from enemy captors. "You're safe here. This is just a hair salon. We thought you might like to feel human again." What Miyako witnessed in that moment defied 8 years of wartime propaganda. The Americans, portrayed as devils in Japanese wartime media, were offering beauty treatments, not interrogation. Comfort, not torture. The salon, hastily constructed on a military base to serve female personnel, had been open to these 20 Japanese women who had been forced into sexual servitude by the Imperial Japanese Army and subsequently captured during the American island-hopping campaign. The story of what happened in that salon and in the weeks that followed would reveal not just the shocking disparity between imperial propaganda and American reality, but would fundamentally transform how these women understood the war that had consumed their youth. Their journey from imperial subjects to prisoners to reluctant witnesses of American abundance would shatter decades of carefully constructed ideology and reveal the mathematical certainty of Japan's defeat long before the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japan that Miyako Tanaka had left behind in 1943 bore little resemblance to the pre-war nation. Rice, the staple of Japanese diet, had been rationed to less than 150 grams per person daily by early 1945. Clothing was so scarce that government posters encouraged women to modify traditional kimonos into more practical clothing. Metal objects, from temple bells to household pots, had been confiscated for the war effort. Children collected acorns and pine needles to supplement food supplies, while factory workers survived on thin gruel and military-issue crackers. Imperial propaganda, however, painted a different picture. The Ministry of Information, under the guidance of Information Minister Michio Yuzawa, had perfected a system of controlled news that portrayed Japanese forces as victorious even as they retreated across the Pacific. American prisoners were depicted as cowering weaklings who begged for mercy when captured, a stark contrast to the stoic Japanese soldier who would rather die than surrender. Radio Tokyo broadcast tales of American supply shortages, claiming that Hollywood movie sets were being dismantled to provide scrap metal for American tanks and aircraft. Lieutenant Hideki Tojo's government had carefully cultivated the image of Americans as morally decadent, yet materially desperate. School children read stories about American families starving while Japanese citizens nobly sacrificed for their divine emperor. The women who would later find themselves in American captivity had grown up with textbooks describing Westerners as spiritually hollow barbarians whose industrial society was collapsing under its own corrupt weight. The military situation that led to Miyako's capture had begun with the American offensive in the Mariana Islands in June 1944. As American forces overwhelmed Japanese defenses on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the Imperial Japanese Navy suffered catastrophic losses in the Philippine Sea. What Japanese civilians weren't told was that these defeats had severed crucial supply lines between the home islands in Japan's southern resource, areas in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaya. By early 1945, Japan's merchant marine had been decimated. From a pre-war strength of 6 million tons of shipping, fewer than 1,800,000 tons remained operational. American submarines alone had sunk more than 5 million tons of Japanese shipping, creating a stranglehold that slowly starved the home islands of oil, rubber, bauxite, and other critical war materials. As the noose tightened around Japan, the Imperial Japanese Army intensified its exploitation of occupied territories. This included the expanded use of the euphemistically named Comfort Women System, military-controlled network of sexual slavery that forced thousands of women from occupied territories to serve in brothels near the front lines. While many were Korean or Chinese, some were Japanese women who had been coerced through false promises of factory or nursing work. Miyako had been one such woman. The daughter of a silk merchant from Kyoto, she had volunteered for women's patriotic service after her family's business collapsed under wartime restrictions. Promised nursing duties at a military hospital in the Philippines, she instead found herself transported to a comfort station on Guam in early 1943. There, along with 23 other Japanese women and more than 50 Korean women, she was forced to serve Japanese soldiers until American forces recaptured the island in July 1944. When American Marines of the 3rd Division discovered the comfort station during mop-up operations, they initially mistook the women for civilians. It was Lieutenant Margaret Wilson, a nurse with the 6th Field Hospital, who recognized the signs of abuse and malnutrition. Rather than treating them as enemy collaborators, Wilson arranged for the women to receive medical care and separate accommodations from Japanese prisoners of war. "These women are victims, not enemies," Wilson wrote in her official report dated August 2, 1944. "Their physical condition suggests sustained malnutrition and abuse. Many show signs of beatings and untreated disease. They require medical attention, adequate nutrition, and humanitarian treatment." It was this report that eventually led to the extraordinary decision to integrate the recovered women into a rehabilitation program unlike anything they could have imagined based on their understanding of Americans. The journey of discovery began not in the beauty salon, but in the field hospital where Miyako and the other women first received American medical care. Captain Robert Hendricks, a physician with the 6th Field Hospital, recorded his observations in a medical log that survived in military archives. "Japanese female patients display extreme fear upon initial contact," he wrote on July 28, 1944. "Several attempted to hide when medical staff approached. Through translators, we learned they expected to be executed or subjected to the same treatment they had endured under Japanese military control." Patient number 7, Tanaka, showed particular surprise when offered a full meal tray, asking repeatedly if the food was actually intended for her. The meal itself became the first shock of abundance. Marine Corps mess halls in 1944 operated on a standard that would have seemed impossible in Japan. Each enlisted Marine received a daily ration of 3,500 calories, nearly triple what civilian Japanese were subsisting on by that stage of the war. The women were served portions of Spam, powdered eggs, coffee with sugar, and condensed milk, canned peaches, and white bread with butter and jam. "They stared at the bread like it was gold," recalled Sergeant Mary Abernathy, a Marine Corps Women's Reserve member assigned as a liaison to the group. One woman, I think her name was Etsuko, wrapped half her bread in a napkin and hid it under her pillow. "When I tried to tell her through the interpreter that more food would come at the next meal, she didn't believe me. She kept saying, 'In Japan, no white bread for 2 years.'" The medical care itself presented another revelation. Each woman received a complete physical examination, blood tests, dental examination, and treatment for various ailments ranging from malnutrition to sexually transmitted infections contracted during their captivity. "The American doctor gave me my own toothbrush," recalled Haruka Nomura in a 1976 interview with the Osaka Daily. "It was blue plastic with white bristles. I had never owned my own toothbrush before. My family had shared one wooden brush in Osaka. The doctor gave each woman the same items: toothbrush, comb, soap that smelled like flowers, and a towel so thick I thought it was a blanket. When I asked if these must be returned, the interpreter laughed and said they were gifts. For women who had survived on rationed soap, often little more than gritty, lye-based cakes by 1944, the abundance of personal hygiene products seemed suspicious at first. Some suspected they were being prepared for some new form of exploitation. Their fears began to dissolve only gradually as days passed without the expected mistreatment. 3 weeks after their initial recovery, the women were moved from the field hospital to a small compound previously used for visiting female personnel. The facility included indoor plumbing with hot water, electric lighting, and even a small electric fan in each room. These simple comforts represented technology that many of the rural-born Korean women had never experienced, and that even the Japanese women had gone without during wartime restrictions. Sachiko Watanabe, another survivor who later emigrated to California, described her first encounter with an American shower in a 1969 oral history. The American woman turned a handle, and hot water came out instantly, not just warm but steaming hot, without heating it on a stove first. I had not felt truly hot water on my skin since leaving home in 1942. She showed me a bottle of shampoo, just for hair, not for body and clothes too. I used too much and my head was covered in foam. The American woman laughed, but not in a cruel way. She showed me how to use just a small amount. The waste of it all! In Japan, my mother had been washing our clothes with water strained through ashes. Food continued to be a source of astonishment. The women were initially served modified diets to help their bodies adjust to higher caloric intake, but within weeks, they were receiving the standard meals prepared for American personnel. Breakfast might include scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, canned fruit, and coffee with sugar and milk. Lunch and dinner featured meat at every meal: canned ham, Spam, corned beef, or occasionally fresh meat when supply ships arrived. Captain Eliza Montgomery, a dietitian with the Medical Corps, noted the women's reactions. They cannot comprehend the quantity or variety. Several have asked if there is a special celebration happening. When told this is ordinary food, patient number 13, Nomura, became visibly emotional and had to leave the dining area. Later, through an interpreter, she explained that her family in Japan had not seen sugar or white rice for more than a year. The concept of meat at every meal was beyond their comprehension. The true turning point, however, came approximately 6 weeks after their recovery. With their physical health improving, Lieutenant Wilson proposed a morale-boosting activity that would prove transformative: a visit to the recently established beauty salon for female military personnel. The salon had been set up in a converted supply building to serve the growing number of Women's Army Corps, WAC, and Navy Waves personnel on the island. It offered basic haircuts, styling, and even primitive permanent wave treatments, luxuries that had disappeared from Japanese civilian life years earlier. When Miyako and 5 other Japanese women were first escorted to the salon that August morning, they initially believed they were being taken to a new location for interrogation. The beauty salon concept had vanished from wartime Japan, where cosmetics had been denounced as wasteful and unpatriotic. Women had been encouraged to abandon makeup and hairstyling as part of their sacrifice for the war effort. Corporal Diana Rodriguez, a hairstylist from Los Angeles who had enlisted in the Women's Army Corps, recalled the women's initial reaction. They came in looking terrified, like they were walking to their execution. The Japanese-American interpreter had to explain 3 times what the salon was for. When it finally registered, one woman began crying silently. Another kept touching the bottles of shampoo and hair tonic like they were hallucinations that might disappear. I showed them American magazine pictures of hairstyles, and they just stared in disbelief. For Miyako, the salon experience became a turning point in her understanding of American society. In a letter smuggled to her sister years later, she wrote, "The American woman washed my hair with scented shampoo, then cut it in a short, modern style. My hair had not been properly cut in 2 years. She used scissors so sharp They made no sound, not like the dull blades we had in the camp. Then she used a machine to make waves in my hair, electricity just for beauty. I was given a hand mirror to see myself. For the first time since leaving Japan, I recognized my reflection. The American woman then painted my fingernails red, using a tiny brush and paint from a glass bottle. I asked the interpreter if this was to mark me as a prisoner. She laughed and said, "No, it's just fashion." Fashion in the middle of war. I realized then that everything we had been told about America was a lie. This realization was not unique to Miyako. Over the following months, as more of the women were incorporated into the rehabilitation program, a pattern of revelation and disbelief emerged, followed by a gradual psychological transformation that military observers documented with clinical interest. Lieutenant Commander Walter Peterson, a naval intelligence officer with training in psychology, interviewed the women regularly and compiled reports on their changing perceptions. His October 1944 assessment noted, "Subject group shows consistent pattern of disorientation when confronted with evidence of American industrial capacity." Initial response typically includes disbelief, accusations of elaborate staging, or assumptions that displayed items represent the entirety of available supply. Secondary response involves testing the reality, requests to see additional items, questioning of multiple personnel, examination of manufacturing details. Tertiary response shows cognitive acceptance but emotional resistance, acceptance that items exist, but reluctance to revise prior beliefs about American society. One particular incident crystallized this progression. In September 1944, a supply shipment arrived at the Guam base, bringing new uniform items for personnel. The women watched from their compound as hundreds of identical boxes were unloaded from a single ship, just one of 27 vessels that arrived that week. Yuriko Hamada, who had been a teacher in Nagoya before being conscripted into the Comfort Women system, asked to inspect one of the boxes. Inside were 100 identical pairs of women's service shoes, each wrapped in tissue paper. The manufacturing date stamped inside showed they had been produced just 2 months earlier in a factory in Massachusetts. She held the shoes and began calculating aloud, recorded the interpreter's notes. 100 pairs in this box, at least 50 boxes visible. 5,000 pairs of women's shoes, all new, all identical. In Japan, leather had been unavailable for civilian shoes since 1942. She asked how many ships brought supplies each month. When told approximately 100 ships serviced this area alone, she sat down suddenly and would not speak for several hours. That evening, Yuriko asked for paper and pencil. She had been calculating the industrial capacity required to produce and ship such quantities. As a former mathematics teacher, she understood the implications better than most. America must have at least 50,000 pairs of women's military shoes in reserve, she wrote in Japanese. This means they have leather for millions of civilian shoes as well. Japan has been cutting boot soles from rubber tires for more than a year. We have been fighting a nation that can waste more resources on women's shoes than our entire army has for boots. The numerical comparisons became increasingly devastating as the women learned more about American production. In late 1944, they were permitted to assist with clerical work, sorting supply manifests under supervision. These documents reveal the scale of American logistics in stark mathematical terms. A single American infantry division required 450 tons of supply daily, food, ammunition, fuel, and replacement equipment. The United States was supporting more than 80 combat divisions worldwide, meaning 36,000 tons of material was being moved daily just for frontline units. This didn't include the vast quantities required for naval vessels, air forces, or rear echelon operations. By comparison, the entire Japanese merchant marine could move approximately 20,000 tons daily by late 1944, and much of that capacity was committed to bringing bare essentials like food and oil to the home islands. The arithmetic of defeat was inescapable. Captain Yoshiko Nakamura, a Japanese-American WAC officer who interviewed the women as part of a military intelligence assessment, reported, Subject Tanaka asked me if American factories were operating at full capacity. When I explained that American automobile factories had been converted to tank and aircraft production but could return to making civilian cars once the war ended, she became agitated. She had been told that America's industrial base was fully committed to war production and was rapidly depleting. The concept of reserved capacity factories that could switch from military to civilian goods contradicted everything she had been taught about. America's ability to sustain the war effort, even more shocking than industrial production, were the everyday demonstrations of abundance. The base PX, post-exchange, became a focal point of disbelief when the women were allowed to visit it under escort in November 1944. The store, while modest by American standards, stocked cigarettes, candy, toiletries, writing paper, playing cards, and other small luxuries for military personnel. Emiko Sato, who had worked in a Tokyo department store before the war, stood motionless in front of a display of Hershey chocolate bars. In Tokyo, chocolate disappeared in 1942, she told her escort. Children were given substitute candies made from sweet potatoes. Here, I see more chocolate in this one small shop than existed in all of Tokyo when I left. The chocolate itself became a symbol of American excess. Each bar was wrapped in foil and paper, materials that had become precious in Japan. When Emiko learned that the average American serviceman could purchase 5 candy bars weekly with their PX ration card, she calculated that the aluminum foil used for chocolate bars on Guam alone would exceed the metal available to a small Japanese factory for a month. What particularly affected the women was American waste. Food left on plates was scraped into garbage cans. Damaged equipment was often discarded rather than repaired. Half-used bars of soap were thrown away when personnel departed. Paper was used once and discarded. Each of these casual acts represented the squandering of items that had become precious in wartime Japan. Nurse Martha Jenkins recorded a poignant moment in her personal diary. Found one of the Japanese women, Tanaka, digging through our trash barrel behind the mess hall today. She had rescued several tin cans and was carefully washing them. When I asked through the interpreter what she was doing, she explained that in Japan, such cans would be treasured and reused many times for cooking, storage, even cut and flattened for roof repairs. She couldn't comprehend that we simply crushed and buried them. In Japan, she said, a woman would walk half a day to find one such can. I didn't have the heart to tell her we throw away thousands daily. The contrast extended beyond consumer goods to infrastructure. The American base on Guam had been rapidly constructed after the island's recapture, yet it featured amenities that had become rare in Japanese cities: reliable electricity, running water, refrigeration, and paved roads. A single American field hospital contained more modern medical equipment than many Japanese civilian hospitals had retained after years of military requisitions. In December 1944, several of the women were permitted to assist at the base hospital, performing simple tasks like folding linens and rolling bandages. There they witnessed American medical care firsthand, including the use of penicillin, a drug virtually unknown in Japanese military medicine and completely unavailable to civilians. Today I watched an American doctor use an entire vial of penicillin for a Marine with an infected finger, wrote Haruka Nomura in a diary provided by her rehabilitation counselor. The interpreter told me this medicine is given to all infections, even minor ones. In the Japanese military hospital, where I worked briefly, officers with serious wounds died of infections while precious medicines were reserved for those expected to return to battle. Here, they use this miracle medicine even for a small infection. I asked the doctor if penicillin was rare. He laughed and showed me a refrigerator with hundreds of vials. We get more each week, he said. How can we fight such a nation? The evidence mounted in countless ways, from the number of vehicles on the base to the quantity of ammunition expended in routine training exercises. American pilots practiced bombing runs, using live ordnance at quantities that Japanese squadrons would have hoarded for actual combat. Artillery units conducted training using shell quantities that exceeded what Japanese batteries might have available for an entire battle. By early 1945, the women had witnessed enough to understand the mathematical certainty of Japan's defeat. The disparity was not merely one of current supplies, but of productive capacity. America was fighting with one industrial arm while supporting its civilian population with the other. Japan had committed every resource to war and was still falling further behind each month. This realization triggered a profound psychological crisis. These women had been raised in an educational system that taught the divine destiny of Japanese victory. The emperor was a living god, and the Japanese spirit would inevitably triumph over Western materialism. Now they faced irrefutable evidence that the spiritual power of Japan was helpless against American factories. Lieutenant Peterson documented this crisis in his February 1945 report. Subjects exhibit classic symptoms of cognitive dissonance. Their foundational beliefs about Japanese-American power relationships have been contradicted by observed reality. This creates intense psychological distress manifesting as depression, anger, denial, and in some cases, physical symptoms including insomnia and loss of appetite. Paradoxically, other subjects display weight, gain and improve physical health while suffering acute psychological distress. Their bodies benefit from American abundance while their belief systems collapse. The transformation was not instant, but occurred in stages. Initially, many women rationalized what they saw as exceptional. Perhaps this single American base was unusually well supplied, or the Americans were deliberately exaggerating their resources to demoralize prisoners. This denial became unsustainable as they observed the consistent flow of supplies and the casual attitude Americans displayed toward material abundance. Some women then entered a phase of anger, feeling betrayed by Japanese leadership that had misrepresented the situation so dramatically. We were told Americans would run out of oil by 1943, Miyako confided to her counselor, "Wonderasti. Yet their ships burn more fuel in a day than my entire neighborhood in Kyoto would use in a year. Why did our leaders lie to us? Did they not know, or did they know and send us to die anyway?" The anger eventually gave way to a deeper reassessment. If the material facts about America had been so wrong, what about the moral characterizations? The women had been warned that Americans would torture and execute prisoners, yet they had received medical care and humane treatment. They had been told Americans were undisciplined and decadent, yet they observed military efficiency and professional conduct. Each collapsed assumption forced a reevaluation of others. By March 1945, as American forces invaded Iwo Jima just 750 miles from Tokyo, the psychological transformation had progressed to acceptance among most of the women. This manifested in unexpected ways. Several began requesting English lessons. Others volunteered for additional work assignments around the base, not from coercion, but from a desire to understand American systems better. Perhaps the most telling evidence came in the form of letters. Although direct communication with Japan remained impossible, the women were encouraged to write letters that would be held until the war's end. These documents, later preserved in military archives, reveal the profound shift in worldview. Miyako Tanaka wrote to her mother on March 18, 1945, "Dearest Mother, if this letter reaches you, you may believe I have been brainwashed by our enemies. I have not. I have seen with my own eyes what no Japanese is permitted to see. America is not struggling or desperate. They fight this war with a small portion of their strength, while their people at home continue to live better than even wealthy Japanese have lived since 1941. The Americans I have met are not devils. They have treated me with more humanity than our own officers did. I do not know when this war will end, but I know with certainty that Japan cannot win. Forgive me for this truth." Yuriko Hamada, the former teacher, addressed her letter to her former school principal. "Respected Principal Tanaka, you taught us that Japanese spirit would overcome American materialism. I believed you. Now I have seen that this was a tragic miscalculation. Spirit cannot stop bullets or bombs. Determination cannot create ships or planes from nothing. The Americans produce more in a day than we can destroy in a month. Their wounded receive better care than our generals. Their common soldiers eat better than Japanese civilians. When you receive this letter, please tell the children the truth. Japan needs to rebuild with clear eyes, not comforting lies. The women's physical transformation paralleled their psychological journey. Military medical records document their changing health with clinical precision. Average weight increased by 22 pounds within 6 months of captivity. Conditions such as beriberi, scurvy, and pellagra, common in the Japanese military and increasingly among civilians, disappeared under American care. Dental health improved dramatically with proper nutrition and hygiene. Even height increased slightly in some of the younger women as proper nutrition allowed for delayed growth. Captain Montgomery's nutritional study noted, subject group arrived with multiple deficiency conditions consistent with long-term malnutrition. Mean body weight was 78% of expected for height and age. After 6 months on standard American rations, mean body weight has increased to 97% of expected. Blood protein levels now within normal range. Subjects who arrived with dull, thinning hair now display normal luster and growth. The most remarkable transformation is in dental health, where regular protein and calcium have arrested decay patterns that were active upon arrival. These physical improvements created their own form of evidence. As one woman remarked through an interpreter, in Japan, they tell us Americans are starving and desperate, yet we prisoners grow fat while our families in Japan grow thin. How can Japan claim victory when their civilians look like prisoners and American prisoners look like civilians? By the summer of 1945, as American forces prepared for the anticipated invasion of the Japanese home islands, the women had become unwitting ambassadors of American abundance. Their transformation was so complete that military authorities began discussing their potential role in post-war reconstruction. Several had begun basic training as nurses' aides, acquiring skills that would be desperately needed in a defeated Japan. Others showed aptitude for administrative work that would be valuable during occupation. The beauty salon visits had evolved from monthly morale-boosting events to regular parts of their routine. The physical transformation was remarkable. Photographs from their initial recovery show gaunt women with hollow eyes and dull, roughly cut hair. 6 months later, they appear almost unrecognizable. Normal weight, styled hair, even modest makeup applied for special occasions. The before and after images would later be used in occupation educational materials as evidence of American humanitarian values. When news of Japan's surrender reached Guam on August 15, 1945, the women's reactions were mixed, but not what might have been expected a year earlier. There was relief rather than despair, concern for family rather than for national shame. Several expressed worry about how their families would adapt to defeat and occupation. Miyako, who had entered the beauty salon a year earlier with terror, now worked there part-time, assisting American personnel with simple tasks. Her English had progressed to basic conversation, and she had become an informal leader among the Japanese women. When the surrender announcement came, she was helping a young Marine prepare for a date, arranging her hair in the latest style seen in American magazines. The American girl cried when she heard the news, Miyako later recalled. She said her brother could come home now. I cried too, thinking of my brother who might still be alive somewhere. We were enemies, sitting together in a beauty salon, crying for the same reasons. This was nothing like the stories I had been told about who Americans were, about who I was supposed to be as a Japanese. In the months that followed, as occupation plans solidified, 19 of the 24 surviving women were recruited for support roles. Their unique experience, having already navigated the psychological journey from imperial subject to witness of American society, made them valuable intermediaries. They understood both the shock that awaited Japanese civilians and the likely resistance to new information that contradicted years of propaganda. Sachiko Watanabe was among the first to return to Japan, arriving in Tokyo with American occupation forces in October 1945. Her official role was as a translator's assistant, but her unofficial function was to help occupation authorities understand the psychological barriers they would face. The Japanese people will not believe what you tell them about America, she advised General MacArthur's staff. They must see it with their own eyes, as I did. When American chocolate bars are given to children, let their mothers watch. When medicine heals their sick, let the doctors see it work. Words mean nothing after years of lies. Only seeing creates belief. This insight shaped aspects of the occupation strategy. Rather than simply asserting American values through proclamations, occupation authorities emphasized visible demonstrations. Food relief was distributed in original packaging with American labels. Medical clinics displayed their equipment and medicines. Even the PX system was partially open to Japanese observation to demonstrate normal American consumer expectations. The women themselves became living evidence of American intentions. Their health, their appearance, and, most importantly, their willingness to work alongside former enemies contradicted fears of vengeful occupation. Several, including Miyako, participated in early radio broadcasts explaining their experiences and reassuring Japanese civilians that humane treatment could be expected. The long-term impact extended beyond the immediate post-war period. 15 of the original group eventually emigrated to the United States, sponsored by military personnel they had met during rehabilitation. Several married Americans, including Haruka Nomura, who wed a Navy corpsman from Seattle in 1949. Others returned to Japan permanently, but maintained correspondence with American friends for decades. Their stories entered the complex narrative of post-war Japanese-American relations. Neither purely victims nor collaborators, they occupied an unusual middle ground as unwilling participants in Imperial Japan's war system, who became inadvertent witnesses to the mathematical reality of American power. Their experiences highlighted the human cost of propaganda and the psychological damage inflicted by leadership that chose comforting lies over difficult truths. Perhaps the most profound impact was on Japanese women's access to beauty and self-care after years of wartime austerity. When American occupation authorities permitted the reopening of beauty salons in Tokyo and other major cities in 1946, they became unexpected symbols of normalization. Japanese women, who had been told that makeup and hairstyling were selfish indulgences during war, suddenly found these simple pleasures restored as symbols of peacetime renewal. Miyako Tanaka, who had learned basic hairdressing skills during her time on Guam, eventually opened a small salon in Yokohama catering to both American personnel and Japanese clients. Named Pacific Bridge Beauty Shop, it became a literal bridge between cultures. American women came for familiarity. Japanese women came for a glimpse of American styles and products. Miyako employed 6 assistants by 1950, including 2 Korean women who had shared her experience as comfort women and prisoners. Beauty is not a luxury, but a necessity for the human spirit, she told a Japanese women's magazine in 1952. During the war, we were told to abandon beauty for the national effort. What I learned from Americans is that a nation strong enough to win does not ask its women to stop being women, its children to stop being children, or its people to stop being human. True strength includes the capacity for beauty, not its rejection. The story of these women, from imperial subjects to sex slaves to prisoners to witnesses of American abundance, and finally to bridges between cultures, represents the journey of Japan itself in microcosm. Their transformation through exposure to material evidence foreshadowed the broader Japanese embrace of economic development over military power in the post-war decades. When Miyako died in 1993 at age 71, her obituary in the Yokohama Daily noted that she had trained more than 300 hairdressers over 4 decades. Her salon, still in operation under her daughter's management, displayed a framed photograph on its wall, 24 women standing outside a wooden building on Guam, their hair freshly styled, their faces showing the first tentative smiles after years of war, the day when the impossible truth of peace and abundance began to seem possible. What these women witnessed in that Guam beauty salon was not merely American material superiority, but an alternative vision of what society could prioritize even during total war. The true power of America, they discovered, was not just its ability to produce more planes and ships than Japan, but its capacity to maintain human comforts that Japanese leadership had declared impossible luxuries. The shocking revelation was not that America was winning the war. By 1944, many Japanese suspected this reality despite official propaganda. The true shock was discovering that America could fight the greatest war in human history while still allocating resources to women's shoes, chocolate bars, beauty salons, and countless other civilian comforts. For women who had been told that total sacrifice was the only path to national survival, this revelation was more devastating than any bombing campaign. It suggested that their suffering had been unnecessary, not an inevitable consequence of war, but a policy choice by leadership that had fundamentally miscalculated both American capabilities and the human need for small dignities even in darkest times. 70 years later, Haruka Nomura's granddaughter would find her grandmother's diary from Guam while cleaning out her Seattle home after her death. Among the final entries was a reflection that captured the essence of what she had learned. The Americans defeated Japan not when they dropped the atomic bomb, but the first time they took us to a beauty salon and showed us that, even in war, they had not forgotten we were human. That was the moment I knew Japan had lost. Not just the war, but the understanding of what gives life meaning beyond mere survival, in that simple act offering beauty services to women who had been treated as disposable commodities by their own military. America had demonstrated a form of power more persuasive than any weapon, the power to maintain humanity amid destruction, to allocate resources to joy amid scarcity, and to treat former enemies with the dignity their own leadership had denied them. It was a lesson that would shape not just these 24 women, but the relationship between two nations for generations to come.